Hi, everybody. Welcome to the last session of today, a session about the flipped classroom. My name is Laura Sukawati, and I work with marketing department here at Jamf. And today you're going to hear from two gentlemen from Hopkins Public Schools, which is a local school district very close to here. And they're this flipped classroom concept that they've implemented in their schools. They're a very cutting-edge school. We've been working with, they've been longtime friends of Jamf. I think they started using the Casper suite in 2005, and so they're always doing something very cool every year. This year, I had the pleasure of working with them on a video. So I spent a few days on site actually seeing this whole flipped classroom in action, getting to see the kids using the devices and how that's really impacting their learning experience. So it's a very cool concept, and we have John and Anthony here to talk to you about it. And I think this is a really unique session because we have John, the on the technical side of things, and we have Anthony, who is a math teacher who has been studying the flipped classroom for several years, so he really is a subject matter expert. So we get to see two perspectives on how this all comes together. So I'd like to welcome them out.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Anthony Paternis. I am a 2/3 math teacher at Hopkins High School, as well as a digital content and integration specialist now this year.
And I'm John Wetter. I'm the Technical Services Manager at Hopkins Public Schools. My umbrella is over basically the operations side of the technology department for Hopkins Public Schools. So working with all of our integrators like Anthony, as well as the curriculum specialists, and making sure that technology is helping to enable the curriculum in the classroom and not getting in the way of things that need to be done.
So today we're going to talk about the flipped classroom, as was already mentioned. I'm going to focus more of my time here at the beginning talking about the structure and what goes into a flipped classroom model, and then John will talk about the technical aspects on how we support that. Oh, there are lovely faces. So here's our agenda. We'll answer the questions: what is the flipped classroom, how the flipped classroom supports learning, and empowering the flipped classroom, creativity with management. A lot of slides here. Okay, here's where I begin. So the flipped classroom, when I start thinking about this and looking at the flipped classroom and all the research and the things that I've noticed, it's really a new and innovative approach to the process of learning. And the flipped model on its own is not really a new invention. Many of us have actually done a flipped or have been in a flipped classroom. If you've ever been assigned a reading assignment to go home and you read something and then you came back to class and then you had a class discussion on what that reading was, that essentially is a flipped model. And the flipped model, really, when you start looking at what technology allows us to do with the flipped model, it allows us to really change the dynamics of the classroom. And if you start looking at implementation of technology in a classroom and you think about the SAMR model, if you're familiar with it, the flipped classroom instructional model, along with technology, really starts to move into that R level of SAMR, of redefinition of classroom instruction, doing things in the classroom that couldn't happen without the technology there beforehand. So here's the basic understanding of what a flipped instructional model is. It's taking what was traditionally done in the classroom, the lecture piece, and creating a short video out of that, moving it out of the classroom. That's what the student's homework was. And then the student's homework, what they traditionally did with a bunch of application problems, now moves into the classroom where they can receive more of that individual one-on-one support within the classroom. And so we're moving from a classroom that looks like this, very rows, prim and proper, we're all looking forward, to a student-centered classroom that looks like this. We're really trying to move, or what this model does is moves the teacher from being the sage on the stage to the guide on the side. No longer is the teacher the person at the front of the room providing all the information that a student needs to know. Now I look at myself as an instructional coach in the classroom, helping students where they are at with what they need in the classroom. It really is a transformative learning process for the students. And you see a lot of group interaction. You see a lot of student-centered work. You can see where we're helping students out individually where they need, where they have questions, and where they are at within the learning process. So I have a short video here that I don't hear sound with, that kind of shows the flipped classroom. Here we go.
Focused at home, and that gives you more opportunities to learn than in like being distracted by other people, and you can always go back and relearn if you really didn't get it.
And do it at your own pace. Like if you need to go back and check something, you can go back in the video, or you can also go, like if you got it, you can just keep going and finish the video, no problem.
I like it because it gives you the opportunity to ask way more questions in class about math problems that you may not know too much about. And if you're teaching, then you can't interrupt and ask questions.
I like it because there's less homework and all you have to do is watch a video.
And how has this helped you as a student?
It's helped me as a student because when I'm in class doing the worksheet, I can just ask questions, or if I'm watching the video, then I can go to school and ask questions about the video online, and it's just a lot easier.
Well, because you don't have to dedicate as much time doing homework at home, so you can do more of it in class.
I like that I get to ask questions in class. I like that I get to do the homework in class because that's what I always have questions on.
All right, and how does this help you?
It helps me because I get to have my own personal tutor teacher in class. It helps me because I understand it better when someone explains it to me while I'm asking questions.
I like the flipped classroom because when I'm at home watching the videos, it gives me an opportunity to take notes at my own pace so I can comprehend, maybe watch it twice or pause and rewind to make sure that I understand all the material. And then when I get to class the next day, I am able to work in a group with all my friends and ask questions and ask the teacher anything that I might not have understood the night before.
Is number 5 neither?
Some of the thought, when you talk to students about it, the first thing that they like to say right away is homework is so much easier. And part of that is because oftentimes, if you think specifically math, when students go home and they start working on a math problem, it can be tough for some students. And then they get stuck and they don't know where to go. And they don't have that teacher or that support. And sometimes parents can't necessarily help them, especially when they get into high school math, where they're at. So they shut down. They don't do their homework. Students find that I can watch a 10-minute video at home and take notes. And even if I don't fully understand it, I can come into the classroom having heard the language, having known some of the stuff, and I'm ready to feel like I can engage a little bit because I have somewhat of an understanding. Pearson, the education company, they're kind of a big textbook company in the United States, released their first large-scale literature review behind the flipped classroom, looking at a lot of case studies. And they defined kind of 4 key components or a framework based on F, L, I, and P that kind of lay out how the classroom gets redefined in a flipped classroom model. The first one for F is flexibility, or a flexible learning environment. So it allows students the ability to, as you had heard students say, to pause a video, rewind a video, move through things at their pace, and try and create the learning process that's flexible in their environment and in their space. The next piece when we talk about the L is learning culture. The flipped model really changes the culture of learning from students being a passive learner in the classroom to an active learner. They have to learn how to engage in the learning process, how to go out and find those pieces of information where they learn, whether it's a video, whether it's interacting with their peers, whether it's contacting their teacher. Then if we look at I, it's about intentional content. Thinking about what the students are seeing at home and how do I now plan my instruction within the classroom. And for me, I'll talk about some of the technical pieces I use, but my students watch a video and then they take a very short 3-question, what we call a formative assessment. So before the students step into my classroom, I have some feedback on how my students understood that content. It lets me know what specific topics out of that video I may need to spend more time on, or ways to group kids to provide remediation within the classroom, or if they all really understood it, how can I find a more advanced level of the topic to get them pushed ahead and moving at a more advanced level. The last piece is P, which would be the professional educator. And I start to now look at my role in education and as the teacher in the classroom as almost being a doctor. I'm looking at each individual student and the data that they bring in, the experiences that they bring in, and their learning process, and prescribing a learning environment that meets their needs and is prescriptive to them. And some of it is thinking about this whole model and where I got started, and a colleague and I were talking about this today, is why do we want, what engages students and brings them into my classroom? Especially now with all the technology and the internet. The days where I am the sole proprietor of all the information on math when a student walks in isn't true anymore. A student can go online and Google anything they want and get the information. So now it's about how do I show them how to tap into those resources and then turn it into a learning experience that's positive for them. So there's kind of 4 main models that I think most flipped classrooms can kind of be classified into. Every flipped classroom has a little variation and a little give and take, but I think they can all basically fall into these 4 models. The first model is kind of a take on mastery learning. So mastery learning's been around for a long time. It's where students move at their own pace and they don't move on to the next level until they're competent in where they're at. The problem with that in a traditional classroom setting is the teacher has to be able to provide instruction to every individual student where they're at, which is difficult for a teacher in the traditional classroom space. In a flipped model, when all the learning is taking place outside in short videos, students can get those learning comprehension pieces at their own pace without the need of the instructor there to give that to them. Now the instructor becomes a coach where the student is at and where their level is at to help guide them and answer their questions and support them as they move through at their level. The traditional flip is the flip that most people hear about when they hear about the flipped classroom, where you just literally, the way the time is changes. You take the homework, move it in the classroom, move the lecture, and move it outside the classroom. Pacing is still the same, but activities within the classroom can change. You can have a peer coaching model or a differentiated instruction or specific groupings based on the needs of your students. The next model is what we call a pre-training flip, where teachers might, at the beginning of a unit, flip a piece of it where students will get some pre-information leading into a larger topic to give them some background information to help engage them in the material that they might learn within the class, within the lecture. And the last model is kind of developed by a person called Ramsey Mozalam. He took this out of the cycles of learning, and he kind of coined it as explore, flip, apply. It's really been seen in the science classrooms, where students will come in and do some grand experiment or exploration type activity. They don't have any knowledge going into it. They're just playing around and exploring. Then when they go home that night, they get the flipped piece, which is an instructional video, kind of giving them some background information. Here is why what we did in class happened. And then when they come to class the next day, they do more of an application piece that goes along with it. So when we look at my flipped classroom, the technical pieces that I use and bring in is I've got the iPads in my classroom. I'm a one-to-one iPad classroom. And part of that is how I deliver content and differentiate instruction within the classroom. But even beyond that iPad piece, it's about access to students to the online content that we have. And students right now don't take my iPads home, but it is a discussion about access as well. So we do have this discussion at the beginning of the course, and I survey my students to see who has routine access and who does not have routine access, and we find ways to provide them access. In our school district at the high school, students that need access that don't routinely have it at home, we have a laptop checkout as well as Wi-Fi hotspots that they can take home. We also, I look at it broader when I talk about access with students as it doesn't mean that you necessarily have high-speed internet at home. Does your apartment lobby have Wi-Fi that you can tap into? Do you have a coffee shop you can go to where you can get Wi-Fi access? Can you access our library before or after school or a public library before or after school? So redefining what access means to a student and showing them how to use those resources to access that content, whether they're outside of school or during the summer or whenever, so that they can have the access to the online media. My videos, I record all of them. All my screen captures are done with a product called Camtasia. As I work with teachers, I do not say use Camtasia right away because it is a expensive piece of software, but it's very nice. So we talk about their QuickTime screen recorder, Screener, some free website stuff. Teachers with iPads might use EduCreations. QuickTime is the biggest one because all our teachers have Apple computers, so QuickTime, if you have an Apple computer, has a screen recorder built in it that you can use. And then we host all our videos on YouTube, and then I use Moodle as my course hosting page. So I host all the content that we use inside of school as well as outside of school right in my Moodle page. I take my YouTube videos and I embed them inside a Moodle quiz with the questions inside there. And that's how the students receive content and engage with the curriculum within my classroom. This is a short snapshot of what a video might look like that I create, and I try and make it fun.
Today I will be guest lecturing here as Albert Einstein on the area of sectors, segments, and the annulus. These all have to do with parts or pieces of circles and how we find their area. The first one we're going to look at is the area of a sector. A sector is a piece of a circle, kind of like a pie. And how would I find the area of that? Well, we do have a formula. A is equal to m over 3.
And I won't go through the whole video, but you can kind of see that the way I create my video, because what I like with Camtasia is I can put my face up in the screen, so it seems to the student like there's a little more of an interaction there. From all the literature that I've read and a lot of the people that I've talked to across the nation that are flipping their classroom, the trend is really talking about teachers creating their own videos. When I talk with teachers who are just starting, I never tell them to start creating their own videos. There's lots of stuff out there for you to tap into, a lot of resources that you can access. But as they continue on, there is some value in creating your own videos because students have a personal connection with your voice and your face, and there's a little more intimacy with that video when they're interacting with it at home as opposed to Bill Nye the Science Guy that you might pull in. And I really noticed that this year because I have a colleague of mine who is trying to flip this year, and instead of him creating videos, he's using a lot of mine. And all of his students think that, you know, I'm famous now because they all know who I am. But he definitely notices that when we have comparison conversations, my students seem to be a lot more engaged in my videos because it's me than his students engaged in the videos they're watching because it's not their direct teacher. Last year, I was finishing up a graduate degree, and my whole research was around the flipped classroom, and I wanted to give away some huge takeaways that I saw within my research and my study. The first one that I have is with English language learners and the language development that we saw. I co-teach a geometry class with one of our ELL teachers, and we've overloaded it with ELL students. And at first, she was really nervous when I told her we were going to flip the classroom. We've been paired up for 4 years now, but she goes, I trust you. We're going to try this. And we were both amazed at what we saw because the ELL students in there were using academic language more than we had ever seen before. And as we started digging into that, we noticed that when students were at home, they were listening to that language and they were writing that language, and then when they came into class, they were speaking that language. So they were using all the modalities that they need for language development. And we also noticed that because they got to preview that lesson and that language when they came to class, they were more apt to engage with their peers within within the classroom because they knew what the conversation was supposed to be about. They knew the language that they were supposed to be using. Time was another piece that I really looked at, and the flipped classroom really allows the teacher a lot more time to engage students on an individual experience. Within one class period, I was able to have a 5-minute conference with 38 different students, talking to them, where are you at right now in this course? Here's how you did on this activity. How can we improve this activity? And strategies that you need to be a better student. Achievement, we noticed that achievement went up from 2.5% to 5% depending on the group of students. High achieving students definitely achieved the same whether they're in a traditional model or a flipped model. Where we saw the biggest growth was in our ELL populations and our lower achieving students, which was fantastic to see. And then the last area that I looked at was individualizing the curriculum for the students. And the data that I noticed and the surveys that I gave out from parents, students, and teachers really demonstrated that this model really provides a more individualized approach to student learning while they're in the classroom.
I think you've definitely seen the power of the flipped classroom now, as Anthony's been talking about that. And to take a look at kind of the other side of the equation here is also now, how do we make this all work? You know, there's definite advantages to this, but also from the IT side, it's also, you know, we're needing to flip our thinking, so to speak, from how we're supporting that, some of the things we have to do really behind that to make it happen. So taking a look at that infrastructure, first thing is bandwidth. You know, lots and lots of bandwidth. So you think about it just from a content delivery aspect. You know, I think one of the number one things that we notice, or that we hear, our service desk hears, is if the internet connection is slow, YouTube is slow, that content that you're expecting to be available is not there, you all of a sudden are forcing your teachers to going into their plan B, which you hate doing that. So whether that content is being delivered, you know, at home, you know, through a YouTube video that the students are watching at home, or you're pulling that content into the district, that connection is very important. And that also goes back to some of the way we've created that content. We started out with some of the content using Podcast Producer. We all know what happened to Podcast Producer. So that was really where a lot of the content was created, and when that was hosted on our network, that outgoing bandwidth was just as important as that bandwidth coming in. And that's not usually a connection that you think about much, frankly. From IT, you're more about getting that content coming down into the district, but when you were hosting it both directions, that's something you need to think about that's different. Now with everything being cloud hosted, that changes the equation. Just for students that are at home or off network, that all is, you know, off of our hands, so to speak, but still a lot of that content coming in, whether it's follow-up lessons that students are working on in the classroom, still have to have that bandwidth available, make sure that things are happening. So really just making sure that that's available. And that is bandwidth end to end. So not only, you know, your internet service provider, but all the way down to the device, making sure that your wireless infrastructure is built out completely. You have to think all the way from endpoint, you know, from Google's server to the iPad, where in there, you know, making sure everything that you have control over in there, that's ready to go. So a lot of times, you know, we've seen these where something is missed in that pathway, whether it's your internet connection or whether it's right down to the 30 iPads come on now and are on YouTube now. You know, do you have enough access to make that happen? Whereas we have access points with 2 radios per access point in every single classroom. So we basically are able to balance that over 2 radios in every single classroom to make sure that that bandwidth is always available end to end to make that process work. And then out to the internet, we have a teamed gigabit Ethernet connection, or fiber connection out to the internet through our service provider. We're looking at even upgrading that even further fairly soon as we're using that connection. It's hard to think, It's hard to believe that just 5 years ago, we had a 35 megabit internet connection, and now we're up at a multi-gigabit internet connection, and we're looking to continue to grow that. A couple pieces looking at of even enabling IPv6 to be able to become tiered off of Internet 2 as well, to open up even more opportunities for our learners. Something I just thought was interesting to throw up here, taking a look at our bandwidth usage, just our first 3 weeks of school this year. Looking at, and this is a 30-minute weighted average, to kind of even out some of those spikes. So you could see by the second week of school, we're spiking days up to about 800 megabit, a 30-minute average throughput of 800 megabit out of the district. So you see the blue versus green. Green is incoming, blue is outgoing. So really a big bandwidth usage, a lot happening in the district. That's something we really make sure that we are in a position to be able to enable that. The course management system, as Anthony mentioned, we use Moodle in-house. I know there's several other solutions out there. This morning, a couple of the presentations were talking about Schoology and some of the pieces that offers as well from an interactivity standpoint. We've decided to really use Moodle and really flesh Moodle out a lot. We're using pretty much everything you can use in Moodle. The quiz bases, Anthony, I'm sure, could talk more about that as far as the quizzes and the interactive pieces that you're actually using.
My testing is actually moved all digitized in there, except for a one-page for students to do some application type problems on. But most of the assessment pieces are now all digitized, so I'm getting all that data back to me. But students actually really appreciate that because they get the instant feedback back to them. Those formative assessments that I was telling you about after the videos, students know they don't count for any points. But I'll have students almost in a game mindset that I've got to keep doing this until I master that level. So they'll take it 4 or 5 times right after another until they get all the answers right. So it's really engaging for students.
And with that, just the background of Moodle. Moodle has become a mission critical. It's probably one of the most mission critical applications that we run in our district. We have a very robust disaster recovery plan in the district, and Moodle is one of the top services in the district. After you get past the life safety systems, Moodle is really our #1 educational system that's right out there. So. If you don't know Moodle, it's an open source course management system. There's several different ways of being able to either host that or do that internally. We've chosen to do that internally. And the main reason is just because of storage. We have a lot of content that people are both putting out there as well as linking to that, like Anthony mentioned with YouTube, and being able to embed that into his class structure. Runs on site, again, we run a very aggressive time frame with that. So from the data system standpoint, we run a 15-minute RPO and RTO on that. So it's a very aggressive timeline as far as how often we're backing that data up, taking snaps of that in our virtual environment, and how quickly we're able to turn that around and be able to do a restore with it. Around the clock use. So that's the big piece that you forget about, and of course several challenges, as I'll mention here too. Really around the clock, it's getting used all the time. This is a quick graph of just the usage that we're seeing with Moodle, and you're seeing that graph is dropping off, does not drop off until just before midnight. So this is a 2 days worth of usage. And you see it spikes up right around 6:30, 7 in the morning, and it's not really falling off until just before midnight.
And this is really a part of the students' flexible learning. They're going in and watching these videos and accessing content when it's flexible for them. And a lot of students have very busy schedules. Granted, we would like them to go to bed at like 9 o'clock and get a full 8 hours of sleep before they get to class. They'd be a little more functional, but their sports, they're in other activities, and they're doing it when they can do it. And we notice that they're accessing videos and content very late at night and very early in the morning sometimes.
iPad setup, so really talking about iPads and the one-to-one deployment, but right now housed in the classroom, whether that be a cart or something else. In this specific setup, again, as we've mentioned, we're looking at other models with that. We do have a one-to-one deployment in our junior high schools, so that's coming as far as we're a year out with that really before we're getting to the high school with that. And so, these are some of the things that we're looking at, and as that program, that one-to-one crosses into the high school, what that's going to look like going forward. So we're really looking at a lot of different setups right now and seeing how that's really going to apply going forward. Supervised and enrolled in Casper, so we do supervise them, and then they are enrolled in Casper so that we can do some of those pieces OTA. That's the big piece. If you've been to any of my presentations in the past, that's one of my #1 things, is that we've got to do as much as we possibly can OTA. We just don't have the people power to be able to be spending all of our days plugging iPads into configurator. Unfortunately, there are several things that you can't do without at least plugging them in once. So like everybody else in the room, I'm sure we'll be looking forward to being able to finally really doing everything over the air, not having to have really the Achilles heel right now that is configurator in the mix there. So something that we're looking at, application deployment as far as managed applications, the only way to go as far as I'm concerned. And really the big deal when we get into this is, when the program first started, it was much less important to be, on top of all of this, but now with the apps have been defined, refined, it's a more set number of applications that are in there. And we're not adding apps a lot anymore. We add a few every once in a while, but it's pretty much, now we've got it figured out. So it's kind of that initial rollout of the iPads where you kind of do get a little bit of sense of app craziness almost with, you're testing tons of apps, your instructional staff is trying to find stuff that's going to work and do what they need it to do in the classroom. From the technical side of it, it's just a continuing list of applications that people are trying that you need to figure out how you're going to support. Is it free? Is it paid? Is it ad-supported, free, which then gets into a whole nother set of conversations. All of those pieces that you've got to figure out as you're setting through that really, calms down quite a bit from the technical side of it, and I'm sure from the instructional side as well, that you calm down, you've got your set of apps that you're using, and kind of that whole idea of dealing with apps backs down quite a bit once you get into the program.
I think from a teacher standpoint, just even looking across the district, our elementaries and junior high teachers are very more app prone than the secondary teachers. We, at the high school level, it's more about what are the least amount of apps that we can use but are going to make the classroom and the device really functionable as a learning tool. So for myself in the classroom, I have 2 apps that I use on the iPad. But the app that I have on the iPad, I couldn't use with any other technology. It's Notability, so students can bring in a worksheet or a PDF document and be able to manipulate it and write all over it. So the device really needs that app. But it's not about the apps, it's about how to use that technology effectively.
Mm-hmm. So providing technical support. So we're talking the infrastructure side, now actually providing support for that. Really the non-traditional classroom requires a non-traditional support structure. This is something that we're working on. This is something I definitely don't think we're there yet. There's a lot of conversations about how we're going to do this going forward. But you remember back to that Moodle graph where you have students using district resources from 7 a.m. until midnight. How do you support that? A typical support day, as far as department coverage, we have 7 to 4 are our official hours with that. So figuring out how we're going to support that is a challenge that we're working on right now. When we get to the question and answer, I'd love to hear if some other districts out there are doing different things with this, and it'd be interesting to hear that. But really, how does that after-hours service desk work? I can imagine that we're not too far out from having an extended hours service desk, or really needing to do that if we're going to be supporting it correctly. But how do you do that? That's a pretty radical change, especially to K-12 technology support thinking. How do you do that? You start doing the revolving schedules, carrying additional staff. What does that look like? Because then, of course, you say the magical words of additional staff, and now you're talking about budget impacts, and you just started a big long line of dominoes going. So something to think about, and really, thinking about that, even at service desk level, how about higher level system support? Because we're going to be going round the clock, because Moodle is one of our top applications, are we going to have not only service desk, but also system administrator support for 15 hours to 18 hours of the day? How are you going to do that and really keep that going forward so that something doesn't just come to the service desk and beyond that? Well, that now it's not an issue of they're clicking on the wrong button, it's higher than that, so well, that's going to just sit until 7 a.m. now. That's something that we've got to think about as this model continues to move forward. So service windows, another interesting piece. So a Moodle service window, you saw when we're using it too. So right now, service windows for Moodle, when we're going to be doing something that's going to require a reboot or require something more intensive on Moodle, those aren't happening until after midnight now. So we have done some of that with being able to be flexible with some of our staff scheduling, but for me, that's not a permanent solution. Yes, we're able to be flexible with our staff, but you can only be flexible to a point, whereas all of a sudden this starts becoming more and more of a thing. We've got to really purposefully think about how we're going to be supporting this. So again, a piece that we've got to look at with that round-the-clock use of our systems. We've got to start thinking about how to support that round the clock. Casper service windows are scheduled for non-instructional days. The only times that we can really get there is when instruction isn't, happening. So those are at breaks. We're very purposeful about any roll-ups that we do with Casper. When we take a look at how we use Casper, we're huge into self-service, which is something that we've thought about really from the beginning with self-service, trying to have as much available as possible. That's something we find out. So teachers just want to get things done. They want to install their application. If they're on a OS 10 computer, they just want to get their printer. They just want to get their application. Sometimes our techs really like to talk to people because they like to help them. But it's something that you really think, a teacher just wants to do it. They just need it done. And so when they can do it themselves, it empowers everybody. It just keeps the system really moving along. So some more future discussions to really talk about. So app and ebook distribution, something to really look at. So as far as ebook distribution, that's been an interesting topic ever since we've really started this discussion, both from our one-to-one program as well as the flipped classroom, and really just a general discussion overall. We haven't purchased many, actually I might even say any, ebooks as far as the published through the Apple bookstore or anything like that. We're really kind of waiting to see how some of the licensing things shake out with that, and really see where some of that goes. And then moving on to the self-created content, that's an interesting topic as far as it's happened a lot more slowly than we originally had anticipated. We definitely do have some pieces out there. Some teachers have been making content and getting some of those pieces ready to go. But it has been a little bit slow as far as on the uptake and really talking about what might be coming.
I think that even though it's been kind of going slow, I think it's about to explode is how I want to look at it. So our junior high when the science department first got their iPads in, they got it because they decided to, instead of purchasing curriculum, we're going to write all our own curriculum and digitize it. And so they used that curriculum money to bring in iPads. And this year is the start of our math review in our district. And so we're looking at, redoing the curriculum K-12 in mathematics. And the big discussion right now at the secondary, and the way most secondary math teachers really want to go, is let's scrap the textbook, let's scrap the company, let's write our own curriculum, let's digitize it, let's collaborate and make our digitized tests, our digitized curriculum, where it's ready to go, and we can update it and modify it whenever we need to, rather than waiting for a 7-year cycle to come up. And that's kind of where a lot of teachers' mindsets are going, looking at digitizing curriculum and creating our own content rather than the packaged stuff that's out there.
Casper Focus. So that's something that we've looked at in the secondary schools. We currently have Casper Focus rolled out quite a bit in several of our elementary schools. But that's something that we're looking at as far as for the secondary schools. One of the big challenges there is getting the student information system importer tool really to a robust level where we're going to be able to keep those classes up to date. Classes in our secondary schools at the high school and our junior high schools, they change sometimes on a daily basis, as far as looking at across the building. The number of, whether it's a schedule change for a student or a new enrollment or a student unenrolling from our district, student population is very mobile. So it's something that we've got to look at, of being able to even keep those classes together and be able to have Casper have the awareness of that class changes, at least close to real time, to make it a really useful tool for us for the classroom. And so that's something that we're going to definitely be keeping a look at. Great success with it in the elementary school, but for the secondary, we've just got those couple things we've got to get there before it's going to be a really nice tool for everyone. So really just to summarize it, so the flipped classroom, really helping students learn. You've seen some of the examples and some of the pieces that we're looking at. The iPads specifically allow for that creativity of the lesson plan and some of the instruction, making that instruction easy for kids to take in. Infrastructure is important and should be planned. Part of that rollout, instead of just surprise, we have iPads, boom, there goes your wireless network. And several talks already throughout the conference here have really talked about those pieces. And support and other future challenges await us. As I mentioned, we've got to figure out how we're going to support that. Right now, students really figure a lot of it out on their own, which is a good thing as well, empowering them to figure out and find their own issues and fix them right on the spot. But as we grow with the program, I think that's something that we're going to have to think about from the IT side of the world, is making sure that we're going to be there ready to support all of our learners with all that new technology. So that's our last slide. I guess we'll open it up for any questions. Yes? We'll get a mic to you here real quick.
Is there a way you can track if the students actually watch the videos?
There's no way to track whether well, the way I have it set up within Moodle, because it's embedded inside a quiz, students actually have to go into that quiz. So I see that in Moodle, I see that login that they've gone into the quiz, that they've attempted the quiz. There's no way to track whether they've actually gone and watched the whole video or not, which is why I also have the 3 questions there. And my mindset with it is a little progressive as compared to some teachers, that if they can already answer the questions, they already know it, so why sit through and listen to the content? Because we've got kids that have come in and already have seen pieces or those things. So for those students, it's even more of an advantage to them because they can move through and not have to bore themselves with content.
I was just interested in knowing when this initiative was starting with the flipped classroom, was it led by a group of teachers saying we want to do this, or was it kind of an administrative level saying let's explore this?
The unique thing that I've seen in the flipped classroom, with the exception of Stillwater, well, in Stillwater it was teacher-led in our district. And most districts where you see flipped classrooms coming in, it's very grassroots, very teacher-initiated with it. And then it was helpful that we had administrative buy-in and they were there to support us with it, because you need to have that administrative support with this model.
What are you using to record?
I'm using Camtasia Studio, that software. Prior to that, I was using QuickTime Screen Recorder and we have active Promethean boards, smart boards, which I use their built-in screen recording software as well.
But actually, the video part, the camera.
Oh, just my computer. I just have my laptop in front of me, and I bring up a smartboard flip chart, and then I just do it right on that chart with a bamboo tablet.
Any other questions? All right. Oh, gonna make Laura run.
How has my lesson planning time changed with it being flipped? It's changed dramatically, because now it's almost, I have a general idea what I'm going to do every day, but since I change it based on the data from what students have on that formative assessment, things get tweaked. So what I try and do is, a lot of it is still being worked and put together, because what I would, in the utopia of my classroom, I would have some kind of advanced level activity, a mid-level activity, and kind of a remediation activity where, based on the scores, students could come in, I can group them and give them an appropriate assignment. That doesn't happen all the time. So I do a lot more it's more planning around how to structure groups in the class with group activities so that they can get peer coaching support, or I can let them work independently on their own while I work with a specific group of students. So it's more looking at how to strategically place students within the class so that I can provide them the support and the instruction that they need while they're in my classroom. Other questions? In the back. Pardon? The video format? The video format is an MP4. If they're using QuickTime, it usually comes out as a .mov file. Because we upload into YouTube, the nice thing is they accept a variety of formats going in there. So I'm using an MP4 when it goes into YouTube. Other questions?
One of the things that's really nice about it going into YouTube even versus the podcast producer like we had been previously using is, once you're into YouTube, then you get at all of the varieties of the delivery of YouTube as well. So whether the student is using an iPad, or whether that student may have a laptop or a desktop at home, or a Chromebook, or who knows what device they're looking at that video on, YouTube's delivering that through the various formats that YouTube's already putting that out, whether it be Flash-based on a desktop, or whether that be H.264 video to deliver on an iPad. That takes that piece of the equation out of it. We don't need to think about that anymore, because using a cloud service like YouTube allows that to be delivered. They're already needing to think about what devices that video is going to be delivered on.
And that was part of my thought with structuring it, because I hadn't had iPads when I started this. It was just my regular classroom with what I had. So I wanted to make sure, and I allowed students to use their own devices within the classroom, but I wanted to make sure that however I created the content, that students could access it from whatever device they were using.
How many teachers have flipped their classrooms?
It started really with me and a colleague of mine is in biology, and now we've got 3 teachers that are doing it full-time at the high school. We've got probably 10 secondary teachers that are exploring it and trying to do different lessons. And there's probably about 12 elementary school teachers that are exploring it and trying to do different lessons and units. There's nobody doing an everyday flip except for me, one of my math colleagues, and the science colleague right now.
What storage requirements are you facing with Moodle?
Pardon?
Say that one more time.
Storage requirements, how much space is being used up by Moodle on the servers and stuff?
Oh, just how much total storage is being used on that? Yeah. Trying to think, I don't know what our number is at right now. Andy, do you know what that number? Yeah, so we're using about 200 gigabytes of storage on that right now. The nice piece of having that, again, in-house, and it's on our, production equipment, so it's sitting in our VMware infrastructure with a fiber channel connected SAN to it. So we have very robust back end, we're lucky to have that type of back end infrastructure to make sure that that's going to be a good, robust setup to make sure that it's highly available.
And at the high school level, to help with that storage space, a lot of teachers at the high school store a lot of content on their Moodle pages. So we really push teachers to kind of reset their courses at the end of each course, dump out their old students, dump out the old assignments that were brought in, so that data is not sitting there, and teachers are getting pretty routine about at the end of a course, we just refresh the course, so all that extra student data isn't there anymore. That's also one nice thing with hosting the videos on YouTube. If a teacher was trying to upload their video file onto Moodle, that would take up a lot of space, whereas when it's in YouTube and we're just embedding the embed code, it's just coding space. Up front.
How long do you do the flipped classroom for every class? I mean, do you do it every day?
Yeah, students get every lesson, every day that would have been an instructional day is a flipped lesson. So they go home, they watch a 10-minute or less video, and the purpose behind the length of that is not because I could do a 20-minute lecture, but if you look at the brain research and how long a student can actually pay attention and comprehend new content, it's about 10 to 15 minutes. So knowing that aspect of how students learn, videos were intentionally created to be that length, to keep them engaged and captivated, to maximize their learning potential in there.
And so does every class do the flipped classroom the whole year or every 6 weeks? Or?
They do it the whole year long. The only nights that they won't have a flipped video are the day before review day, because there's no new content coming, and the day before the test, which students find really nice because now they feel they have 2 nights of study time prior to a test, and test night, now they have a video or a homework, which traditionally in the traditional classroom, test day is yay day because there's no homework that day. Now there's kind of 2 days of no homework prior to a test that they can specifically use to prepare for an upcoming exam. Other questions?
Sorry,
in the back.
When you were using the Google videos, you mentioned about the URL. So you're copying the URL of the Google video, and that's how they're accessing it then?
Yep. So what I do after I upload it into YouTube, there's 2 ways. There's multiple ways you can share it, but the one way is they'll give you the link to it. The other way is you can actually click embed, and you can copy and paste the HTML embed code right into the HTML coding within Moodle. So I just, in the Moodle quiz, when you say edit the question, there's a tab that says go to the HTML editor, and then I just copy and paste. For teachers that don't know any HTML at all, it's really easy for them because, again, it's just click the HTML button and copy and paste, and it's there and done for them. So it's a pretty slick thing that YouTube already has the code ready to go. How far ahead do I allow students to get? It depends. In my pre-calculus class right now, they're only kind of going a day ahead, and that's not because I don't want it that way. That's because it's the first time I flipped pre-calc, so I'm kind of building the videos as I go. But in my geometry course, which I've been flipping now for 2 years, I open up an entire unit at a time. I don't give them the whole year's or semester's worth of material, but I give them at least a unit, because some of these kids, again, are really busy. And if they know they've got this activity going on this night or this big test coming up here, it allows the student the flexibility to, maybe I'm going to watch 2 lessons tonight to get myself a little bit ahead and manage my schedule a little bit. And they've really appreciated that. Other questions? Is that right over here?
Yell it out.
So the question was, how often am I updating my videos? They're pretty consistent from semester to semester. I am starting to get into the process now of looking at the formative assessment data, not just for how the students understood it, but also to see if I'm consistently from course to course getting the same amount of students getting this question wrong, my video is missing that piece or not explaining it well enough to students. So then I'll go back and edit that video. But it's more particular videos based on what I see from the students. It was hard the first time I ran through it because that's the only feedback I had. Now that I'm in my kind of my 3rd iteration, because we're on a block schedule, I can now use that consecutive data to kind of now pick at some videos and fix them if I need to. But it's not a lot of videos that I've been having to fix at the moment. Other questions? So the question was, some teachers use Moodle and some Edmodo. Why did we choose Moodle? Good question. Moodle was already here when I started in the district.
Yeah, there's been several different reasons, I guess, of how we got here. Several years ago, we did look at quite a few of the different pieces out there. Blackboard and Moodle and several others. But now, it's over the last several years, it's really partly become a piece of momentum as well, is that's a recognizable name. You can say Moodle, and a teacher who maybe hasn't invested heavily into it yet, you say the name and they immediately know what you're talking about, though. So Moodle has grown very well, especially now that we're up into the version 2 code. We were sitting on 1.9 for quite a while, waiting for several of the new pieces to get ready to go. And some of the big things going into 2, it's one of those deals where every product, at least that we've looked at, is every product is kind of a race. Maybe right now, Moodle is better. Tomorrow, maybe Schoology is a little better. The next one, maybe Blackboard did a big version upgrade, so they're the better one. And what we've looked at so far is really, it's a pretty good race, so to speak, that they're just doing incremental steps ahead of each other at this point. So while there may be one differentiating feature with one of the systems now, the next version of the other ones will have that as well. So we haven't seen a big reason to move to other ones. We're always exploring the different pieces. Several of the districts around us are using Schoology. So we were able to get some feedback from them and learn about the good, the bad, and the ugly of every different solution that you're looking at. But really, Moodle, especially now that we're into the current version of Moodle, has really provided everything that our teachers are looking for. Being able to get that content in there, being able to do the quizzes, being able to do questions where you're looking at the solution of the question and then whether you're presenting another question, conditional questions within the quizzes. A lot of those things that our instructional staff have really been looking for, Moodle's meeting those needs.
I think from a teacher integration standpoint too, now that we've had Moodle around, I mean, I've been in the district for 7 years and that's all I've known. And Moodle is so ingrained in the way staff operate that to transition to a new student system, it's really got to be a giant wow factor, because you really have to transition and move your entire staff along to a new system. And when they already know a system really well and can really manipulate it and take a high advantage of it to really create an engaging classroom with that tool, it's serving its purpose the way we want it to. In the back.
I did not hear.
Do you manage your Moodle upgrades internally?
I guess from what aspect are you looking at? Oh, okay. So the question is, do we do all of our management of Moodle internally, or are we working with a VAR or someone that's helping us with those upgrades? Am I understanding that correctly? Okay. Yeah, we do everything internally. As far as, Moodle has, Moodle.org has their forums where you can at least, what we do with a lot of things, you can at least take the temperature of a new update on whether it's going well or not well in the community. But as far as working with that on our system side, we do great work there. We have people doing great work that keeping current on Moodle, both on the instructional side, looking at what's coming in the new version. Are we fine where we at? Nothing's broken. Do we need to go to this new version right now? Or if we are to jump to the new version, what does it do for us instructionally? Is this something we need to try to get in during the school year right now? Or is this something of that's just to get us up to the latest code base we'll do over winter break, or we'll do over the summer, something like that. But really our system staff have taken that on as being something that they've become subject matter experts on, and making sure that they're understanding the back end of Moodle as well. With for instance, going up with Moodle 2 now, we're really moving to a much more adaptive design interface to the Moodle pages, so that it's going to adapt the interface to it depending on what device you're looking at it on. Just like the move to Casper 9, the number one thing to do there is you've got your interface that's going to be the interface no matter what you're looking at from a device. A lot of that same thing is happening with Moodle, so that we can get that to be a good, consistent presentation of the instructional materials no matter the device that the students are accessing it with. And yeah, we are doing all of that internally. Just a couple years ago, we had looked at even outsourcing to do some theming work and to do some of those pieces of that, but we did decide to keep that in-house, and really from a theme, we've really reduced what we have in there. We all of the plans to go to these, exciting, lots of color themes and all that, it's like, let's back that way down to do a really minimalistic approach to that, and make sure that that content is what's forward. So, we don't spend a lot of time tweaking on that, and that's where sometimes you get in trouble, is if you're just constantly wanting to tweak this and that and the other piece, you're going to drop that reliability of your system because you're constantly doing something to it. Some of that is also just the infrastructure that we are running it in VMware. You get a lot of the benefits of that, where we can just do a snapshot of it, roll it to the side, run the upgrade. If it blows it up, we know we know to wait. So, because of some of the infrastructure we have in place internally, we can take some of those risks because we're doing that in a sandbox environment and see what will happen. We run full-time a sandbox version of our Moodle environment, where we are testing out, whether it's working with tech integration. Our tech integration coordinator works very closely with our systems administrator on trying new things. you know, what's happening instructionally that we need to try to support, you know, whether it be the Moodle mobile app, or whether it be, you know, some of the third-party Moodle mobile apps that are out there as well. What needs to change on the system side to make that happen, that we can roll a lot of that out in the sandbox, test it, and then do a go-live date with that is very important. We have a very good process in place with that, where we're making sure that everybody knows what's happening there.
All right, well, we are out of time, unfortunately, but thank you all for your questions. If you have any more, you might be able to catch one of them in the hallway. And thank you too as well.
All right, thanks. Thank you. Have a good afternoon.